Good morning, this is Nigel Farage bringing you the latest edition of Phone Farage on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 minutes taking your calls, and this is your chance to put any question you like to me, and I'll do my very best to answer. So the number for you to get in touch and get involved is 0345 60 60 973. That's 0345 60 60 973. And don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on the website lbc.co.uk. And our first caller this morning is David in King's Cross. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. I'd just like to ask you, as you know, the UK overspends £300 million a day of tax we haven't got. Do you think that the House of Lords were correct to vote down the government who are trying to reduce that horrendous situation?
Very interesting one. Traditionally, or I say since the 1911 reforms, which I don't remember myself, but that great sort of change in the role of the House of Lords, apropos the Commons, since 1911, it's been convention that on money bills, the House of Lords does not oppose the government of the day. The question, I guess, David, is was this a money bill? Now, Osborne, quite sneakily, tried to bring this change in using statutory instruments, and I think he got repaid for his sneakiness by them saying, well, to hell with it, if you're going to do it this way, it's not really a money bill. Were they right to do it? Probably not. I think the House of Lords has fallen in terms of its reputation over the course of the last few years. It seemed to be, a chamber that is stuffed with policemen from the two main parties. It's seemed to be a place, frankly, that now wants to start flexing its muscles. The funny thing, David, is this. The irony is this. If we're going to be very critical of the House of Lords, either because it interferes in this case or because it's unelected and having a say over legislation, then the cry comes for us to have an elected House of Lords. And I think logically in the end, that's where we're going to have to go. However, once the House of Lords is elected, boy, it'll flex its muscles then, and we'll see some of the constitutional gridlock that we see on Capitol Hill in Washington on a regular basis. So I think, really, David, my answer to you is that the House of Lords has been, I think Blair, Brown and Cameron have just appointed so many people to it that it's lost all credibility, and I think it's in for wholesale reform over the course of the next decade or so. What do you think, David?
Yep.
What do you think?
I totally agree. I think it's a national disgrace that an unelected body can vote down the elected government, and it does require reform. And they couldn't create a worse system than we currently have.
No, I think that's right. Although, of course, one of the reasons that maybe, and I'm saying this gently because I don't want to be sued, but maybe it suits the big parties to keep the system as it is, because provided they get lots of donations, they in turn then give peerages. I'm told this happens. I mean, it may not be true. So like everything, I mean, if we need reform, David, of the House of Lords, and I agree with you, we do, but equally, don't we need reform of the House of Commons? I mean, we have a government, that's got 36% of the vote, 23% of the overall potential vote, and yet has a complete majority to do pretty much whatever it likes. And without sounding too whingy at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, a party like UKIP with 4 million votes and just one representative. So I think actually our whole system needs a very good looking at.
Just before we move on from this, Mr. Farage, how was the situation influenced by the scrapping of hereditary peers? What did that bring about?
Well, I mean, clearly it appeared to be indefensible to have hereditary peers. Descendants of George IV's or William IV's drinking mates, sitting on the benches.
But they didn't bring up a necessary political hue to it.
I think what was interesting was that the vast majority of hereditary peers only ever spoke on subjects about which they had expertise.
Fox hunting.
Well, in many cases, yes, it might have been that. Or landed estates or whatever it may be. We didn't have great constitutional crises.
Was this a constitutional crisis earlier this week?
Nearly. But it shows that there is an appetite in the House of Lords. And there's clearly a majority between the Labour and the Liberal Democrat. I mean, 104 hereditaries the Liberal Democrats have got. 104! Do you know how many UKIP have got?
Go on.
How about none? Well, actually, we've got 3, but they all defected. But the Lib Dems have actually been given 104.
Yeah.
The whole system looks ridiculous. I sense that the Hereditaries kind of knew their place a little bit, and I think that you've put in the House a lot more people who are very politically active, and I think this battle will run and run. That's my view.
And we must move and run. Where are we going next?
We're running to Lambeth to speak to Anne-Marie.
Hello, good morning, Nigel.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask you what UKIP's position are on the reduction of working tax and child tax credit. I understand that UKIP also agree with the government that they need to be cut.
Well, I would agree with the principle that we should pay people well for doing jobs. And I mean, Anne-Marie, nobody has screamed more loudly than me about wage compression over the course of the last few years. We've flooded the labour market in this country with foreign labour. We've driven down, the money that people earn. And I've argued for a long time that if you stop that oversupply of labour, stop big companies taking advantage of this, then people would get paid better to do their jobs. We are where we are. Because New Labour fell completely into bed with giant corporate business, and what Brown effectively did was to subsidise cheap labour with tax top-up. So that's why we are where we are here. However, when you think that over the last 8 to 9 years, people on average salaries have had a pretty miserable near decade now, where they've effectively seen their living standards at best stand still, and in many cases decline, the very last thing we should be doing right now is hitting 3 million working people hard in the pockets next year. And so the way the government are doing this, I think is pretty appalling, frankly. I support the concept that Frank Field, a really rather sensible Labour MP, and Frank's proposal would be that you don't cut any of the tax credits until the increases in minimum wage kick in, so that nobody is worse off. And I would like to see that, Anne-Marie, as a minimum position. For so many people, the incentives for coming off benefit and family support and all the things that are out there in society, the incentive for coming off those and going to work, frankly, just isn't big enough. So I hope that answers the question for you.
Quick response, in a sentence, if you would, Anne-Marie.
I just wonder why the Tory government have decided to bring in the tax cuts first before actually raising the tax threshold and bring in the minimum wage. I wonder why they've...
Well, two reasons. The first, of course, is that George Osborne has been a disaster as far as our public finances are concerned. He doubled the national debt in the course of the last 5-year Parliament, and the figures for the first 6 months thus far in this Parliament are bad. So he wants to cut the overall level of debt we're running every year. But politically, look, they've got a majority. Why should they worry? And if that sounds horribly cynical, Anne-Marie, I'm afraid it is. But I also think it's true.
Welcome to the world of politics in some sense.
Okay, moving on to Mary in Croydon. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. Hearing about the increase in tuberculosis in London, in this country, is very scary. I'm wondering if immigrants shouldn't be health checked when they come before they enter the country. I know it would be expensive, but wouldn't that save a lot of problems?
This is a City Hall report that showed that now London is the TB capital of Western Europe, and in some boroughs such as Brent and Newham there's more TB than there is in countries such as Rwanda and Iran. Mr. Farage, routine health checks?
Mary, I knew exactly where your question was going. Of course, you are 100% right. But make sure you don't give your surname out. Otherwise, you'll be hounded, as I have been, for being a ghastly person. I tried in the general election to point out that any country that runs a sensible immigration system does actually do a number of checks on people. It checks people for communicable diseases. It checks people for criminal records. It makes sure that people who are coming have an address to go to. This is what normal countries do. But I'm afraid, Mary, we've suspended all of that. And we've gone for this dream of the free movement of people. And we don't want to be judgmental. But
you were called heartless when you said this.
Oh, heartless. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I tried to make...
How did you react to that, Mr. Farage?
if you talk about TB or you talk about HIV or you talk about any of these things, Nick, you are accused of being heartless. But the point is that it is the first duty of government to protect its own citizens. And when you see increasingly, and I know it's not easy, but increasingly you see cancer drugs being withdrawn from people because they're too expensive.
10,000 early deaths, it was revealed yesterday,
yes,
because of the postcode lottery when it comes to cancer.
Yes.
Just to underscore the point you've made.
Yes, and when you realise, what is health tourism costing? I don't know, 1-2 billion a year, maybe it's more, who's to say, but those figures are roughly where we are. And my argument, and I think be with Mary at one on this, is that it's our job to look after the healthcare of our own people first, and for it to be a national health service and not an international health service.
And when someone is screened and they have TB, you just bolt the door in their face.
Well, you either say, I'm sorry, but we just don't want this, we don't need this. Or, of course, the alternative is they may say, no, it's fine, I've got the money and I can pay for the treatment. And that would be another way of looking at this.
So if they can self-fund, they could still possibly gain access to UK.
I think that's right. But I touched on this HIV issue, and of course I know that the entire establishment have condemned me for it. But all I can say in response to my critics is the number of letters, and I've kept them all, they're in a file, and one day I'll use them. The number of letters I had from British HIV sufferers who say now getting an appointment, getting the drugs they need has become increasingly difficult because we have effectively said, we'll provide this care to anyone that comes in from anywhere in the world. And, looking after your own people isn't being heartless. That's the point I would make.
And when you say use them, Mr. Farage, what you say you've got these letters, they're in a file, and one day you'll use them. What do you mean by use them?
Well, I've got to protect the identity of the individuals concerned.
But you'll use them to underscore the support for what you're...
Yes. And it's one of those issues. I sometimes think that the metropolitan London media elite, I'm sorry, I'm looking at you, Nick, but I was
born in Kent, do you mind?
I know, but I sometimes think there are issues like this where the media class and their friends in the Notting Hill set have a certain view on the world, and they're somewhat contemptuous of the way that ordinary people think and feel about these issues. And we're not heartless. Goodness me, we as a country give stacks of money to charities, disaster relief, helping kids all over the world, Christian aid, you name it. We're not a heartless country. We're actually more generous than the rest of Europe when it comes to charitable giving. But when it comes to our public services in this country, and a feeling that in many cases families are paid in for generations, then it's a question of priorities in terms of who you treat.
We move on.
We do. We go to Mel in Cannock. Good morning.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah. Good.
My question. First role of a government is to protect its citizens. Taking bobbies on the beat, I think, would make it higher risk. What do you think?
It's really funny, this one. I mean, to me, and I obviously have to sort of put this disclaimer. I haven't got a sort of degree in criminal law, so I'm just sort of going on a hunch here. But it seems to me that if you see uniformed people on the beat, hopefully not in some sort of ghastly yellow high-vis jacket, but a smart uniform. But if you see officers on the beat, I would have thought that gives generally people a sense of well-being and was a deterrent to opportunistic crime. That's how I would view it. And yet there seem to be all sorts of academic studies, Mel, telling us that actually it makes no difference at all and it represents very bad value for money. I don't know whether I'm right or they're right, but I stick with my hunch, which is that actually having bobbies on the beat would make us all feel safer and a little bit happier. What do you think?
Well, like I say, I live in a bungalow. I'm a retired pensioner, and the police do come round here sometimes. They chat to us, but that's going to disappear. And it makes people feel safer.
Yeah, I think that's right. And
it does make people feel safer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I remember about 2 years ago, there was a big police protest in London. About 20,000 police officers lobbied Parliament, and as someone said, it's really good to see so many police on the streets for once.
Just on this subject, thank you for the call, Mel. This is coming from Alex as a text. Nigel Farage is known as speaking up front and saying what he thinks. Can we have his thoughts on the Madeleine McCann case? They've gone from 29 police officers to 4, and it's cost £10 million. How was it 29 ever in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I've met the McCanns. I've sat down and talked to them. I feel desperately sorry for them, not just for the loss of a child, but for the way in which they were condemned. You know, they'd left the child alone, they'd gone for dinner, and yeah, of course, it's not the sort of thing parents should do. But I bet there are very few parents listening to this show this morning who haven't at some time, popped to the shops for 2 minutes or whatever it may be. And I felt that some of the attacks on them in the British media were, pretty nasty stuff. The police have a job to do. They have to allocate resources. A decade has gone by. I think, as you say, 29 was always a huge number, but the fact that it's been reduced probably is the right thing to do.
We move on, Mr. Farage.
We do. We go to Michael in Sunbury-on-Thames. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Nigel.
Good morning.
I live on the floodplain near Heathrow, and I understand that there's going to be no remodelling or checking on the impact of a third runway on that floodplain. What do you think of that?
Two things. Firstly, I have been unconvinced about the need for a third runway for a very, very long time. I'm very, very struck that traffic-wise and train-wise, West London is, frankly, operating at full already, and I just don't see how it can take any more. If Heathrow needs to be the hub airport where people go through, well, that's fine. What we should do is take some of the smaller short-haul packages away from Heathrow, and they could go to Gatwick, or perhaps even...
So give Gatwick another runway.
Or we have got facilities like Manston being completely unused. Manston's unused, Southend's booming, because to build another runway even at Gatwick would take a long time. So I don't think a third runway, I don't think a massive increase in sheer numbers of people going in and out of Heathrow every day is a good idea. But can I make a second point, Michael? That is the whole attitude towards floodplains. It's, a year ago when we saw those extraordinary scenes down in Somerset, but equally, we saw some pretty awful things happening around the Thames as well. And we seem to have given up traditional river management, by which I mean dredging. And I think the sooner the authorities on the Thames and elsewhere recognise that whatever EU environmental law says, actually dredging blooming well works, the better.
Thank you for that. We move on. Thank you for that.
Michael,
we move on.
We go to Brian in Hornchurch. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning, Nick.
Hello.
My question relates to the TalkTalk crisis that we're in at the moment. I just wondered how you feel this should be dealt with, considering that the company's now had 3 breaches of security in the last 12 months. Do you think they should be sanctioned? Do you think the public that are their customers should be allowed to walk away from any content?
If you were from where I'm from, then you would know that I gotta get mine in a big black truck. You can get yours in a 6-4. Whatever it is, the party's underway. So tip up your cup and throw your hands up and let me hear the party say, if it's so good in my hood tonight, the party's underway. Party's underway.
Consumer confidence, take their business elsewhere. I think the market actually will sort this one out.
All right, thank you for that. Let's do some more of the emails, texts and tweets that are coming in before we come to another call. This comes from Rachel in Bexley. Who's right as regards stop and search in London? Theresa May or Bernard Hogan-Howe? By which, of course, I think she means Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, who is reintroducing it in certain targeted areas.
Yeah.
And Theresa May, who seems to be a fairly staunch opponent of this idea.
Well,
Nigel Farage.
Yeah. Theresa May gave that speech at the Black Police Officers Association. And it appeared that a lot of the things she said that day were tailored to that audience. Now, I do understand that we want a police force that reflects the society in which we live, and it's a question of how we get to that and whether we need to use positive discrimination. But I thought...
Where do you stand on positive discrimination?
I've never liked positive discrimination. I think, frankly, it's insulting, whether it's gender quotas or racial quotas. I think with the police, it makes the public say, well, is that person there because they're good enough, or have they been put there to fill a quota?
But do you agree with Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe's drive to try and get more non-white officers?
Yes, I
in
do.
the Met?
And actually, it's working. Actually, within the Met, there is quite a radical change going on. And, Theresa May attacked, was it Diffid and Powys? Well, there isn't actually a huge black community in Diffid anyway. So no, actually what Hogan-Howe is doing is the right thing, and we're getting there. I don't always agree with everything that Hogan-Howe has said, and I certainly over the Leon Britton case, and you and I have discussed that in the past. However, I think on stop and search, and I will take off my hat as a political figure and just speak as somebody who's got young teenage kids around London, and we all have those natural, normal fears about our kids going out into the world, and they want to go out to parties on Saturday nights and all the normal things that they should be wanting to do.
That we did as well as kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the increase in knife carrying, as a sort of a trend, a cult thing to do, is deeply disturbing. It's rather like guns, isn't it? The Americans carry guns, so they quite often shoot each other. And if people carry knives, well, it's fact, isn't it? And if people carry knives, there must be a greater propensity to use knives. And I think that on Stop and Search, I think Bernard Hogan-Howe has been really quite brave, shown leadership, and I bet you, if we polled LBC listeners, the vast majority would support Hogan-Howe on this, and I do.
Just while you mention LBC listeners, I just want to remind you that Nigel Farage has his own late-night phone-in this Sunday on LBC. He's covering for my colleague Ian Collins. 3 hours of Nigel Farage. He'll be here from 10 p.m. on Sunday. Looking forward to it.
Oh, very much indeed. It's a great opportunity. I've spent much of my life travelling around the country listening to all sorts of late-night talk shows.
Now you've got one.
And interpreting how well or badly the hosts were doing. And no, I'm looking forward to it a lot. I am told that there is a regulator called Ofcom, and there are rules that have to be abided by. And after this discussion that we're having this morning, I'm going to be taken off.
Oh, are you? You've got your Ofcom training?
A darkened room by an LBC executive.
Right. And can I tell you what all we presenters agree? Whenever you go for Ofcom training, just nod. Don't actually ask any questions and get out as quick as you can. Just say, you're absolutely right, and I totally agree. Sign here, and I've done my training.
But no, I'm looking forward to it, and 3 hours is a long time, and I will try and pick some pretty contentious issues of the day. And I will challenge people to come and knock down my arguments. So, I hope it's going to be good fun.
Tracy in Hertfordshire. David Cameron says we don't need the Norwegian model as part of a Brexit. Does he honestly think that there aren't other ways we can go? I would like to know Nigel's views on that, says Tracy.
Yeah, it's bizarre, Tracy, isn't it? We're told Britain's not big enough. She couldn't possibly survive on her own and make her own trade deals. And people say, well, actually, Norway, Iceland and Switzerland do pretty well. Oh, yeah, but they're ghastly little countries. I mean, this disparagement of these countries is extraordinary. Look, Norway, let's just sort of get a couple of things here right, shall we? The Prime Minister saying how ghastly Norway is. They're rich. They top the world's happiness index. They're allowed to catch their own fish. And they've made their own trade relationship with Europe, which suits them.
But they have to pay would say they'd have to pay the cash and have none of the decision-making power.
Well, that is straightforward untrue, because actually they don't pay their money to Brussels. They pay their money directly to some of the poorer emerging southern and eastern European countries. And you know why they do it? They choose to do it, and perhaps because they're a lot richer than us, they're able to do it. So that's not true. We're told Norway doesn't have a seat at the top table. Oh, yes, it does. Norway sits at the World Trade Organization. We don't. Britain doesn't. We're represented by somebody who's there from the European Union. We're told that Norway has to accept all the rules. Oh, no, they don't. It's almost Christmas panto warming up here, isn't it? Oh, no, they don't. When the Postal Services Directive came out, the one that effectively closed hundreds of post offices all over Britain, the Norwegians said, no, we're vetoing it. So the Norwegians retain the right of veto. However, Norway needs the EU economically far more than the EU needs Norway. Why? Because about 75% of their exports go to the European Union, and they trade with the European Union at a massive profit every year. So they're prepared to make a few little concessions, and that suits them. Tracy, Mr. Cameron, if you're listening, we are not Norway. We are a country of 65 million people. Well, it's probably rather bigger than that, actually, but let's call it 65 million people. We trade with the European Union, Nick, at a massive, massive deficit, about £50 billion a year. Actually, Germany should be paying us to be in the European Union, given the number of motor cars they sell in this country. Tracy, I was in business before being in politics, which is pretty rare actually these days. And the one thing when you run a business is, like it or not, the customer is king. And in this case, in terms of our relationship with the European Union in trade, we are the customer. And if Norway can find a deal that suits Norway, and Iceland and Switzerland can find deals that suit them, and they're rich, successful, happy countries, then we can do even better than that. And I think for Mr. Cameron to be coming out with these arguments shows two things. Firstly, he's given up on the renegotiation. Clearly given up. Clearly decided he must just go all guns to try and keep Britain in the European Union. And secondly, I would say I think his arguments are beginning to get a little bit desperate.
Let's go to some calls. It is phone Farage, Mr. Farage. So where do we go next?
And we've got Frank in Aldershot. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. We heard a lot about what happens if the UK leaves the European Union. I want to know what you think will happen if we stop in.
Well, if we stop in, Frank, then we are stopping in a club that is failing. It has a migrant crisis, which is threatening to blow it apart. Prime Minister of Slovakia saying maybe the whole thing will crumble over the course of the next few months. We're stuck in something that is in perpetual crisis with a currency, which thank goodness we did not join. We're stuck in something whose budget, and I was there yesterday in Strasbourg voting on the budget, and the budget's gone up by another 10 billion sterling this year, so the cost will keep going up. And we're stuck in something, Frank, where they have stated in the last fortnight they now want Turkey to become a member.
What would that mean to Britain, Mr. Farage?
Well, there are two things to say here. Firstly, Nick, that Turkey is becoming more and more unstable. Some very, very big tensions with the Kurdish community, a government that has become profoundly more authoritarian, some would say even Islamist in its approach. A population of 75 million, and people who are even poorer than those that recently joined from countries like Romania and Bulgaria. Frank, none of us can ever predict the future with certainty. But I would say this to you. I think the risk of staying in something that costs a fortune, that wants to expand to allow in even more poor countries, and where increasingly there are tensions between the member states, is not a risk that I want to take. And I think it's a safer thing, Frank, to say, do you know what? For good or for bad, we're going to take back our own destiny in our own hands and be the master of our own house.
And it's fair to say, Mr. Farage, if Turkey was to come into Europe and Britain was still in Europe, Europe's borders would end at Syria. And that brings me into a speech made yesterday by Andrew Parker. You may have been travelling, I don't know if you heard about this, the Director General of the Security Service. He says Britain is facing the highest terror threat he has seen in his 32-year career. He believes that IS is planning a mass casualty attack on this country. There is a three-dimensional threat, as he calls it, an increasing amount of MI5's casework linked to Syria and IS. He also hinted at the fact that possibly some of the migrants, as you've said I think you told me this about 4 months ago, 6 months ago, you fear that some of these migrants might be deliberately planted. Mr. Farage.
I fear that Andrew Parker is right. I fear that he's right, and I genuinely fear that the now uncontrollable numbers of people that are coming into Europe as winter approaches amidst that. And you can listen to government ministers from Jordan, government ministers from Libya. They're telling us that ISIL are using these routes to get their people embedded within Europe, and I'm deeply fearful of it. And I've always been somebody that's hated big government and surveillance, and I can't bear any of it. But I think the threat we face is so grave that we have to allow the Andrew Parkers of the world to do their job.
By which you mean greater powers?
I don't see we have any alternative.
And I'm afraid. And on this, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, you'll be aware, has told Europe that they are committing a catastrophic error. They need to learn a lesson, possibly from how Australia is. I thought the speech he gave in Mansion House on Tuesday night was phenomenal, and I've been echoing over the last 6 months very many of the things. Why does no one listen, Mr. Farage?
They don't want to, because they don't want to appear to be unkind or nasty. So far better to imperil our own civilization than to stand up and be tough. Australia faced a similar crisis with the boats coming to Australia, and Australia dealt with it. I fear the problem is this, though. The message that went out from the European Union that I warned about back in April, then what Mrs. Merkel did over the course of a summer, effectively, you've taken the cork out of a champagne bottle. How on earth do you put that cork back in? Because now Mr. Juncker's talking about border controls and registering everybody. I was next to him when he was saying it on Tuesday morning. So now they're talking a different language, but it's a bit too late, because the message has gone out to everybody that you can come. So Tony Abbott, if we'd followed Tony Abbott, and by the way, in May, Tony Abbott offered to come to Brussels and to advise the European Union on how the Australians had dealt with it, and that offer of help was rejected.
Can we try and fit in one final call? He's been hanging on. You're off
Steve,
on training or wait for a minute, I'm sure.
Steve from Stevenage, good morning.
Oh, hello, Mr. Farage.
Hi.
Hello, sir. We're told forever that the EU doesn't make any of our laws and all the rest of it. I mean, there seems to be a lot of strings attached to being a member of it, though. Our MPs the other day had a chance to vote on the ludicrous tax that we're told we have to charge on our ladies' sanitary products.
Yep.
I just wondered, sir, if you were an MP and voted, how would you have voted, and what do you think about it?
It was in the UKIP manifesto in the general election that we should be able to remove VAT on tampons. We proposed this, we got this debate going, but of course we're not allowed to do it. We're members of the European Union. And could I remind you, Steve, that in the last 48 hours there's been a warning from the European Court that says the government attempt in this country to put pornography filters on our computers to protect our children is against European law. And I listen to these people who tell me, oh no, don't worry about Europe, it doesn't affect our lives. It affects every single aspect of our lives. And one last point, if I can. When Cameron was challenged yesterday in Prime Minister's questions about the state of the steel industry, he said, albeit too little too late, I will go to Brussels and I will ask for permission to give some compensation for the very high energy costs to UK steel producers. It reminds me of a scene from Charles Dickens's Oliver, a British Prime Minister going to Brussels with the begging bowl, saying, please, sir, can we have some of our own money on our own laws back? And I think, Steve, all of it, frankly, is shaming. We are a great country. It's just our leaders don't believe we are. And I want us to win this referendum and take back what is rightfully ours, our ability to make, for good or bad, to make our own decisions.
We are a great country. We're a growing country. Just lastly, within the last 2 minutes, the Office for National Statistics, Mr. Farage, has put out figures. The UK's population will rise by 9.7 million over the next 25 years, according to official projections. It'll take it to just over 73 million people in this country.
Hurrah! Isn't that marvellous? Lovely, isn't it? Won't the Victoria Line be even more fun in 15 years' time than it is now? And we better increase our house building, hadn't we, and cover our green and pleasant land. I'm sorry, when your population grows as rapidly as ours has done in the last 20 years or so, you can talk to me about GDP statistics until you're blue in the face. I don't care. I'm not interested. What I'm interested in is the quality of life. And I think a rapidly increasing population is diminishing our quality of life in this country. And if those figures are right, and given current immigration levels, they will be right, I don't think that's desirable. I think we should do something about it.
You can catch Nigel Farage. He has his own show here on LBC this Sunday, covering for my colleague Ian Collins, 3 hours, starting from 10 p.m. on Sunday. Nigel Farage, and for Phone Farage, Mr. Farage, thank you very much indeed for today.
And some people will agree with it, and some people will disagree with it. At least they know what I stand for, which over the last couple of decades in British politics has been a more difficult question to answer about.
And is that what lies behind Corbyn mania?
Yes, I think it is. I think, here's a bloke who stands up and